Thank you very much, Roy, and thank you, Roy and Fiona, for inviting me to speak today. So, as a caveat, before I begin this talk properly, I'm not talking about recent new discoveries in Pompeii today. That doesn't mean I haven't been thinking about them, and in fact I've been thinking about nothing but the concept of discovery in Pompeii for the last academic year. As Roy says, I've been teaching a module about the history of Pompeii, not the history of the town in antiquity, but the history of its excavation and its subsequent reconstruction, both in a conceptual sense, how we reconstruct what we know about Pompeii from the excavations themselves, but also the physical reconstructions that were being set up over the course of its excavation history, and reconstructing Pompeii, as I'm going to be talking about today, in pictures, visual reconstruction. So that's my caveat. You all know what to expect now, and we can all head back to Sophie afterwards and to Alison to ask questions about recent discoveries after I finish talking. So, in October 2020, according to the Statistica website, the Pompeii Parco Archeologico Instagram account boasted 201,102 followers. There were 134,588 friends on Facebook and just under 30,000 followers on the site formerly known as Twitter. Now, these are very healthy, very respectable numbers for the social media accounts of an ancient site, and certainly far many more than the majority of Roman towns outside of the Eternal City are able to generate. Since that date in 2020, however, the numbers have grown. Today on Instagram, followers have doubled to over 420,000. On Facebook, there are more than 250,000 friends, and on formerly known as Twitter, numbers have trebled to over 90,000. Now, this surge in numbers can in part be attributed to a much more aggressive social media strategy post-pandemic, but for those of us who follow on one or more of the different social media platforms, what has kept our interest and attention has been Pompeii's use of them to communicate with us about the seemingly endless flow of new discoveries that are being made there and at the other Vesuvian sites. For example, on the 11th of April this year, the park posted an image of the now beloved Black Room from the new excavations of Insula 10 in Region 9 that you can see on the left of the slide. This was posted on Instagram to a reception of 9,578 likes. The post on the right of the new fresco uncovered in the Insula of the Chaste Lovers, published on the 28th of May 2024, also won nearly 10,000 likes as well. This post from the 3rd of June of the Blue Sacrarium that we just heard about in Region 9 was liked more than 16,500 times. Now, these new discoveries are certainly, obviously, worthy of this much attention, and the instant nature of social media communication allows us as an audience, as we did today listening to Sophie, feel part of the process, to feel part of the excavation itself. However, I think it's worth noting that such speedy dissemination of news about Pompeii is itself a new phenomenon, because for much of Pompeii's history, knowledge of the excavations depended on their reconstruction in printed books, access to which was not always easily available or in tune with the speed of excavation. So in this talk, rather than focusing on the new discoveries at Pompeii, I'd like to think about how new discoveries at the Vesuvian sites have been recorded and presented to their public audience in the past, and in particular in the 18th and 19th centuries, and how that presentation has come to shape the way that we think about them. Today's new discoveries, I think, are really rooted in this 18th and 19th century legacy of how they were reported and disseminated, and the desire both then and now to understand how the ruins of the Vesuvian sites reflect the lives and lifestyles of their inhabitants. So, through images produced by artists such as Francesco Piranesi, Charles-François Mazois, William Gell and Luigi Bazzani in the 18th and 19th centuries, the social media photographs and videos of today shall be shown to be just another chapter in the history of how the reconstruction of Pompeii in pictures has been at the forefront of the public imagination since its initial rediscovery. Now, of course, Herculaneum was the first of the Vesuvian sites to be identified after the Austrian general, the Duke d'Elbeuf, happened upon what was later identified as the theatre of Herculaneum in 1709 during the deepening of a well shaft. Further digging in 1738, undertaken by the military engineer Alcubierre, working for the Bourbon King Charles VII of Naples, also hit the theatre, where existing well shafts were deepened to reach 20 metres below ground level. Now, using miners, prisoners, soldiers, tunnels were dug in fairly haphazard fashions. You can see one of them on the right-hand side there. Sometimes following the lines of ancient walls, sometimes breaking straight through them. Now, the Bourbon court famously insisted on absolute secrecy, and so both the finds from the digging and from the space itself being dug were absolutely shrouded in mystery. The first visual communication that we get of the dig at Herculaneum came a decade later, in 1747, in the form of a plan that recorded the first year of Alcubierre's work on the excavation. So by the time this plan is published or is made known, it's already 10 years out of date. You can see already the lack of organisation. We can see the shape of the theatre, but crisscrossing it across the middle are a series of very haphazard tunnels. These were dug for the purpose of treasure hunting. Alcubierre offers no scale, no dimensions, and the accompanying key to this plan only listed the finds. There's no indication of the relationship between the tunnels themselves and the different levels of the theatre. We do get a very simple elevation plan in the bottom right-hand corner that shows how the seating was organised, but that's about it. So this is a plan that receives a huge amount of criticism in modern scholarship today because of that haphazard nature of the tunnel's organisation. But although imperfect, it is an invaluable plan for the early history of the site. It shows more than just basic archaeological remains. It delineates the architectural features as revealed by access through tunnelling, whilst communicating that this is still a buried building. The other interesting thing about this plan is that it wasn't generated, it wasn't produced for public consumption. This was rather sort of the official version of Alcubierre's record of the digs for the Bourbon court. And so this was, again, part of this very secretive kind of environment in which knowledge about Pompeii was being generated. Knowledge of the theatre's, I should say that the finds at Herculaneum were actually eventually published, the first volume in 1757, and they're publishing up until 1792 the 8 volumes of the Antiquities of Herculaneum Exposed. These volumes were extremely expensive to produce, and for that reason they again weren't intended for public consumption. These were used as diplomatic gifts between the Bourbon court and other visiting dignitaries. So although very fine reproductions of the paintings and the other finds that were coming out of Herculaneum were being made, they weren't reaching a very wide audience. So knowledge of the theatre's shape and architecture in fact became known from the 1753 publication, which eclipsed the Bourbons' plans for publication of the volume I just mentioned. The observations upon the antiquities of the town of Herculaneum was jointly authored by the French architect and engraver Jérôme Charles Bellicard and the engraver and writer Charles-Nicolas Cochin the Younger, who had visited the dig with a French dignitary invited by the Bourbon court. Bellicard had been given Alcubierre's plan, and to this he added his own notes, and so this is his version of that plan with his own additional notes, made almost unbelievably for us today from memory. There was no drawing to be done on site, and so Bellicard, after his visit, made his own sketch according to Alcubierre's plan and then added his notes of everything that he remembered. This resulted in the published version from 1753-1754, which is a schematic plan and section of the structure in its entirety, plus indications of where sculptural monuments should be placed, so up here, down at the side. This combined what was known from the excavations with what the Greek and Roman authors told us about the practices of building and using theatres. The publication of the observations was a huge cultural coup for Bellicard and Cochin, who managed to break Bourbon secrecy about the site and to broadcast the finds to an international and extremely eager audience. So following the publication of the observations, we see numerous other publications about the theatre coming out. One of the finest, I think, is that of Francesco Piranesi, the theatre of Herculaneum. Francesco Piranesi is the son of the very famous printmaker of the 18th century, Giovanni Battista Piranesi, and he produces an entire volume dedicated to the theatre. And in his images, the theatre, as you can see, has become this fully living, breathing structure. Gone are the tunnels and the indications of digging, and in their place is a fully reconstructed theatre to scale, with technical elevations and proportions clearly indicated. The bronze horses found in fragments in the theatre have been fully reconstructed by Francesco Piranesi, and have been placed back in their correct position on the marble bases of the top tier of seating. So Francesco Piranesi's point here is clear. In spite of the fact that the theatre was still then and is still now buried, its discovery was a seminal moment in how we related our knowledge of the ancients and their architectural and material remains. In his case, observing the similarities between the ancient architect Vitruvius's descriptions of theatres and the one that had been uncovered at Herculaneum. The 19th century saw a huge surge in the number of publications made about Pompeii. So Pompeii was identified in 1763 through the discovery of an inscription that named the place, and all attention from that date onwards had swung round to Pompeii, and sort of they abandoned Herculaneum in the process. We've still got the same culture of secrecy going on around the digs, so very little information was being disseminated to a public audience, really just lists of finds that were reaching international magazines or journals. But very little discussion of the archaeology or of the scale of what was being excavated. Once the French took over, however, the Kingdom of Naples and the Two Sicilies in 1799, that culture of secrecy changed and resulted in the publication of some of the most important works, early works on Roman art. The most striking of these was Les Ruines de Pompeii, by Charles-François Mazois, which appeared in 3 volumes during the second decade of the 19th century, with a 4th volume appearing posthumously. Through the agency of the architect to Caroline Murat, the new Queen of Naples, Mazois had been appointed désignateur de son cabinet, the head designer, and given all access to the excavations, still jealously controlled by the Naples Academy, but no longer under their governance. From 1809 to 1811, Mazois resided in the ruins, making hundreds upon hundreds of drawings. Of all the early 19th century architects to visit Pompeii, Mazois was the most deeply immersed in recording the archaeology and providing imaginative reconstructions of how the buildings might have appeared in Roman times. At the beginning of 1811, Mazois returned to Rome, where he apparently supervised the engraving of some of his drawings, and proceeded from there to Paris, where he prepared scholarly texts to accompany the fates in his books, which discussed different aspects of daily Roman life. Unusually for the time, Mazois was interested not just in the monumental buildings, but in ordinary domestic architecture, its furnishings and the decorations, and what these revealed about the social life of Pompeii. So here you can see some of his examples. This is his plan of the House of Queen Caroline in Region 8. It's a house that's largely exposed during the Bourbon and Napoleonic period and takes its name from that Queen Caroline, Caroline Murat, whose patronage supported the excavation. Now, writing in 1824, Mazois refers to the house as partially excavated, and he depicts it so in his drawing of it here. He says, it's only partially excavated, however, this excavation deserves to be completed, because the paintings and decorations found there are of the best taste and of beautiful execution. In his drawing, he manages to balance the sensibility of the ruin with the accurate analysis that he has made in his plan, seeking not to portray the grandeur of the structure, but in fact a more accurate representation of the monument, of the building, and its context than had been the norm in previous antiquarian publications. However, many of his printed watercolours appeared in black and white in those first 3 volumes, and they take on a very two-dimensional sort of flat quality in which the detail and the accuracy of that detail is very quickly lost. This is a print from his discussion of the house of Poppidius Rufus. This is decoration from the atrium. And here we have some of his detail of decoration from the tablinum of the same house, which you can see just through the doorway over here. And these images arguably don't capture the fine detail of the decoration that he was so painstakingly recording. However, by the time volume 4 was in print in 1838, following his death, some plates were in the process of being hand-coloured, which brought his designs to life in bold technicolor, helping to popularise the aesthetic and architectural styles of ancient Rome, and really reinvigorating neoclassical interiors in the process. Beyond their historical and archaeological value, Mazois' illustrations were, and are today, valuable for their artistic quality. His pictures of Pompeii are a cornerstone in the study of ancient Roman architecture and urbanism, offering a window into the past that continues to inform and inspire both scholars and enthusiasts of classical antiquity today. Now, the other person who's working in the same kind of context as Mazois, and who should be mentioned alongside him, particularly regarding the excitement around the discovery of Pompeian domestic architecture, is Sir William Gell and his publication of the Pompeiana. So Gell was an English traveller, a classical archaeologist, an illustrator. After his BA and MA at Emmanuel College, Cambridge, he travelled in Greece and published 2 books about its geography and antiquities, really establishing his reputation as a classical topographer. And after travelling to Italy with Caroline of Brunswick, the estranged wife of King George IV, in 1814, he subsequently moved to Rome in 1820. And during his time there, he would visit ruins and vistas where he made sketches and drawings that he turned into engravings for publication. His work included books on Troy, Ithaca, Greece, Rome, and eventually Pompeii. And it was this publication that would become his best-known work. So Pompeiana, the topography, edifices, and ornaments of Pompeii. Crucially, this was the first English language guide to the discoveries of Pompeii as well. It was published in 1817, and Gell both wrote and illustrated it in collaboration with the architect and archaeologist J.P. Gandy. Now, the second edition, written by Gell alone, was published in 1832, and this 2-volume updated version contained information about new discoveries that had been made since the publication of the first edition, including the now extremely popular House of the Tragic Poet. These discoveries offered new glimpses into the private dwellings of everyday Romans. The ruins and the depictions of them by Gell revealed ways in which the Pompeian interior was used to convey 19th century values and views about the ancient world. Gell strove for objectivity and accuracy, both in the scale of the ruins, his reconstructions of their ancient appearance, using archaeological and literary sources, as well as the newly invented camera lucida to inform his work. So the accurate recording of the monuments of Pompeii was important not only for the purpose of making archaeological discoveries available to a larger audience, but also to preserve them for posterity. And this was something that Gell recognised the responsibility of in the second edition of the Pompeiana. Already in the early 19th century, artists and archaeologists were noting the rapid deterioration of recently excavated paintings and lamented the policies that imposed a waiting period on foreign artists who wished to draw them. Here we have a view by Gell taken soon after its discovery, at a moment when certain shades of drapery had been placed to protect the painting of Achilles from the effects of the sun. Sorry, see that. However, despite the scientific accuracy for which Gell strove and their importance in understanding the 19th century excavations, his drawings of Pompeian interiors betray 19th century concerns with the monumentality of ruin, the importance of the individual, and the melancholy of loss. And he just can't quite help himself but introduce these lovely 19th century figures into his reconstruction of what of what he believes the house should look like. So this is the structure as it was in the 19th century, and then his repopulation of it, sort of after the fact. Gell's Pompeiana engravings reveal him to be a passionate admirer of antiquity, attempting to reconcile the actual state of Pompeian remains with his own vision of the past, resulting in work that is much a product of its own time as the objective document that Gell intended. So speaking of passionate admirers of antiquity, we should mention Luigi Bazzani, who for 35 years recorded the new excavations at Pompeii in watercolours at the turn of the 20th century. Having trained in Bologna, he moved to Rome in 1861, and then from 1880 to 1915 documented the ruins of Pompeii that had been exposed during that period. Bazzani experimented with the techniques of architectural relief, and his attention to detail was prized by those who were then working at the site. His technical skill enabled him to replicate antique stone, mimicking the rough surfaces of damaged stucco and brickwork, and his muted colour palette reflected the remaining frescoes as they began to fade, having been exposed to the elements in the course of their excavation. His works are crucial for capturing the state of the ruins before significant restoration and reconstruction efforts were undertaken, making his illustrations invaluable records of the original condition of the site and the artefacts within it at this precise moment in time. So to look at some of his best known examples, here we have the House of the Silver Wedding, and there's obviously a photograph, a modern photograph of it. And the reason for thinking about this house in particular is that the House of the Silver Wedding was one of the very first domestic houses in Pompeii to have parts of its architecture fully reconstructed. So all of that roof that you can see here is restoration, done in the 19th century. It was named after the royal visit of Umberto I and Margherita of Savoy on their silver wedding anniversary in 1893, and it's still described by the Pompeii website as one of the most solemn and majestic examples of what the home of a member of the aristocracy of Pompeii looked like, and is characterised by impressive architectural solutions. This in spite of the fact that the majority of that atrium is 19th century in date. The success of the reconstruction, though, served as a model for future work. So this is Bazzani's depiction of it. So this is what it looked like when he was on site. So his watercolour, looking southeast across the impluvium in the atrium towards the tablinum from the west side, is essential for us to understand what the building actually looked like when it was first uncovered. And we've got a photograph of it in the process of excavation there as well in 1892. So I think when we think about the combination of those three images, we can reconstruct not only how we understand how 19th century archaeologists in Pompeii understood the house to look, but also reconstruct the excavations and the state of the house post-excavation in the early 20th century. This is a detail of wall painting from the house that is still in situ, and you can see that depicting this kind of domestic detail is a problem for seemingly all of the artists who are reproducing it from domestic architecture in Pompeii. Even when coloured, they take on a very, very two-dimensional sort of flat quality that is really, I think, at odds with just how tangible and tangibly architectural Bazzani's depictions of the actual houses are. This is an image of the atrium from the House of the Vetti, and I think it really shows that sort of the architectural works where Bazzani really finds his rhythm in terms of realism. It's the highest degree of realism, and I was only thinking this last night on the way down from Newcastle. There's a coincidence there, I think, that Bazzani was working at the same time that Giuseppe Fiorelli was innovating the casting of body cavities in plaster at Pompeii. The height of his work coincided with that period. And so he's working at a time when actually the tangible reality of Pompeii is becoming something that is more materially visible, tangibly felt on site. And certainly in the images that he produces of actual architecture, there is that sense of reality, of realism, coming through in a way that the detail of the houses doesn't contain. So, as Pompeii moved into the 20th century, the focus of attention shifted from the discovery of houses, their decoration, and the access they gave to how the ancients inhabited them, towards understanding the topography and the stratigraphy of the site. And as the 20th century became the 21st, attention turned towards conservation efforts and undoing the unintentional harm of earlier reconstructions and interventions. No longer did images made of new excavations attempt to capture the spirit of the daily life, architecture and customs of ancient Pompeii, as did those imagined by the 18th and 19th century artists. Images which, whilst not always accurate, helped to contextualise the historical and archaeological findings in a visually engaging way. In the academic world, and excuse me for this one, Sophie, recording Pompeii in pictures became a more scientific endeavour, one that took the romance out of rediscovery and reconstruction and instead focused on soil layers and documentation and evidence in a less exciting way for some of us. And in terms of public consumption, gone with the imagined houses of Pompeii, replaced with a macabre interest in the casts of deceased inhabitants, and salacious storytelling about their lives. Which brings me back to Instagram and the delight that we take in the pictures of the new discoveries at Pompeii that are being shared with us today. Because I think our reception of those images is closer to the spirit with which Mazois, Gell and Bazzani created their works than we might imagine. In a pre-photographic world, their pictures not only served as historical records that capture the state of the site at different points in time, but also reflect a desire to capture the detail, the life of Pompeii before it would be lost again. Pompeii, obviously, as we've been hearing today, offers a unique window into ancient Roman life, and the city's sudden burial preserved the buildings, the artefacts, the remains of its inhabitants in such a way that it provides an extraordinary level of detail about daily life in antiquity that we just don't have access to at any other place. The way that daily life is reconstructed in pictures helps us visualise how the city and its structures might have looked before the eruption. The pictures offer insights into Roman architecture, to urban planning and societal norms, and by seeing these reconstructions, we as viewers can better understand and connect with the historical narratives that they encompass. Visual depictions, be they engravings, watercolours, 3D models, or indeed Instagram posts, bring the past to life, creating a powerful emotional connection as well as an intellectual one, evoking empathy and a deeper appreciation for the human experience across time. We have an innate curiosity about the past and an imagination that thrives on visual stimuli. Pictures feed this curiosity and help satisfy our desire to see and understand what ancient civilizations like Pompeii were like. With every new discovery, we feel one step closer, just as Mazois, Gell and Bazzani did before us, to fully comprehending the art, the culture and the engineering of the ancient Roman city. I'm going to finish on one of Sophie's images. For several centuries now, pictures of Pompeii's reconstructions have provided a virtual travel experience, allowing people to explore the site from afar, preserving and honouring the history of Pompeii and ensuring that the memory and significance of the site endure for future generations. Recording and reconstructing the discoveries that come out of Pompeii in picture form has contributed to its place in collective cultural memory, with these images, old and new, keeping the story of Pompeii alive in the public consciousness and ensuring that it remains a vibrant and influential part of our understanding of the ancient